I stopped believing in God somewhere between Normandy and the Bulge. Strange thing for a chaplain to say, I know. But if you want the truth, that's the truth. I went to war believing I could bring comfort, bring faith, bring the word of God to men in their darkest hours. What I found instead was that God had no place in war, not in the mud, not in the blood, not in the screaming. My name is Captain Robert Hayes. I was a chaplain with the 101st Airborne Division. Before the war, I was a Methodist minister in a small town in Ohio. Had a congregation of maybe 200 people. Good people. We'd talk about love thy neighbor, about grace, about God's plan. It all made sense in that church, with the sun coming through the stained glass windows and the organ playing hymns. It made no sense at all when I was kneeling in French mud giving last rites to a 19-year-old boy with his guts spilling out. I volunteered for the Chaplain Corps in 1942. 31 years old, married with no children. My wife begged me not to go. But I felt called, felt like God needed me to be there for our soldiers, to give them spiritual support, to help them face death with faith. I trained with the paratroopers. They made us jump. Couldn't be an airborne chaplain if you couldn't jump. I was terrified, but I did it. 6 jumps to earn my wings. The men respected that. Respect matters when you're trying to reach souls. We jumped into Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Scattered drops, chaos, men landing in trees, in flooded fields, alone in the dark behind enemy lines. I landed in a hedgerow, got tangled in my chute, cut myself free, and started looking for my unit. Found them by following the sound of gunfire. That first day, I prayed over 14 dead paratroopers, 14 boys who'd jumped into France with me, who'd been alive at takeoff, dead before sunset. I said the prayers I'd been taught, commended their souls to God, asked for mercy and grace. But even then, on that first day, a voice in my head was asking, where was God when they needed him? Where was grace when the bullets were flying? Where was mercy in war? I didn't have answers. I just kept saying the prayers, because that's what a chaplain does, even when he stops believing the words. The Battle of the Bulge started December 16th, 1944. We were in Belgium, supposed to be a quiet sector, rest and refit after the hell of Holland. The Germans had other plans. They hit us before dawn with everything they had: artillery, armor, infantry. Massive offensive that caught everyone by surprise. We fell back, tried to form defensive lines, got surrounded at Bastogne. That's where I learned what it really meant to be a chaplain in combat. We were dug in around the town, Germans surrounding us, supplies running low. Cold like I'd never felt before. Men were getting frostbite, trench foot, dying from the cold as much as from enemy fire. The wounded were piling up in aid stations with no morphine, limited bandages, surgeons operating by candlelight. I moved between positions, visiting the men, offering what comfort I could. But what do you say to a soldier whose feet are frozen solid, who's starving, who knows he's surrounded by an entire German army? God is with you, I'd tell them. The words felt hollow in my mouth. Where? One kid asked me. PFC Morrison from Georgia. Where is God, Chaplain? Because I sure as hell don't see him. I didn't have an answer, so I sat with him instead, shared my cigarette ration, talked about his home, his family. Sometimes presence is more important than prayers. The shelling was constant, Germans pounding us day and night. I'd be in the middle of a prayer service. We held them in basements, in ruins, anywhere we could gather. And shells would start falling. We'd keep going, had to. The men needed something to hold on to, even if it was just words. Christmas Eve, 1944. We held a service in a bombed-out church. Maybe 100 men crammed in there, most of them wounded, all of them exhausted. I tried to talk about hope, about the birth of Christ, about God's love for mankind. Halfway through my sermon, the shelling started again, close. The building shook, dust falling from the ceiling. The men ducked, covered their heads, waited for a direct hit. I kept preaching, not because I believed what I was saying, but because they needed me to believe, needed someone to stand there and act like God was present, like faith mattered, like there was meaning in all this suffering. A shell hit 50 yards away. The blast threw me against the wall. My ears were ringing, couldn't hear anything. When the dust cleared, I saw the men looking at me, waiting for me to finish, waiting for me to tell them it would be okay. I climbed back to the front, opened my mouth. No words came out at first. My faith was gone. My belief was shattered. But they were looking at me with such desperate hope. So I lied. I stood there and I lied to them about God's love and God's plan and how everything would be okay. And they believed me. Because they needed to believe something. The worst moments weren't the big battles. They were the quiet ones, the individual deaths, the boys calling for me as they died. There was a kid named Tommy Brennan, Irish Catholic from Boston. Got hit by shrapnel during a German assault in January 45. Tore his chest open, punctured his lungs. He was drowning in his own blood. He grabbed my hand. "Father," he said. Called me Father even though I wasn't Catholic. "Father, I need confession. I need to be absolved." I wasn't a priest, couldn't give absolution, didn't even believe in it anymore. But he was dying and he was terrified and he needed something. So I heard his confession. Right there in the snow, with gunfire in the background, with his blood soaking into my uniform. He told me about sins that weren't really sins. Told me about being angry at his father, about lying to his mother, about thoughts he'd had about a girl back home. "Am I going to hell?" he asked, blood bubbling on his lips. "Father, am I damned?" I looked at this boy, 19 years old, dying in the snow in Belgium, had volunteered to fight, had done his duty, had killed men because his country told him to, and he was worried about lying to his mother. "No," I told him, "you're not damned. God forgives you. You're going home, Tommy. You're going to a better place." He smiled, relaxed, closed his eyes. He died believing he was saved, and maybe that was the only truth that mattered. But I was the one who had to stay, had to carry the weight of all those lies I told, all those promises I made about God's love while boys died in agony, all those assurances that there was meaning in their suffering. The aid stations were the worst. Rows of wounded and dying men. Medics and surgeons doing what they could with almost nothing. Amputations without anesthesia. Men screaming. Men begging for death. I'd walk through, stop at each man, offer prayer. Some wanted it. Some cursed me. Some just stared with empty eyes. "Chaplain," a surgeon said to me one night, "I need you to hold this man down while I take his leg." No morphine left, nothing for pain, just a saw and screaming. I held him, prayed out loud while he shrieked. Prayed that God would give him strength, would ease his suffering, would make this quick. Prayed even though I didn't believe God was listening. Prayed because the alternative was admitting that we were alone, that suffering was meaningless, that nothing I did mattered. The man passed out from pain. The surgeon finished. The leg went in a pile with the others. "Thanks, Chaplain," the surgeon said. He was covered in blood, hands shaking. He'd been operating for 16 hours straight. "I don't know how you do it, how you keep faith through all this." I wanted to tell him I didn't have faith, that I was empty inside, that every prayer I said was a lie. But he needed me to be strong. needed me to be the one person who still believed. So I lied to him too, told him faith sustained me, told him God gave me strength. Then I went outside and vomited in the snow. That was my breaking point. Not one moment, but 1,000 small ones. Each dying boy, each prayer I didn't believe, each time I promised meaning where there was none. By the time we crossed into Germany in March, I was a hollow shell wearing a chaplain's uniform. We pushed into Germany through the spring of 1945. Town after town, city after city. The Wehrmacht was collapsing, but they kept fighting. More boys died taking ground that would have been surrendered a week later anyway. I performed funerals almost daily, sometimes multiple funerals. We'd stack the bodies, wrap them in shelter halves, bury them in temporary graves. I'd say the same words over and over. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Commit them to God's care. Promise grieving friends that the dead were in a better place. The words meant nothing anymore. Just sounds I made because that was my job. We liberated a concentration camp in April, Dachau. I won't describe what we found there. Others have told those stories better than I can. But I'll tell you what it did to whatever was left of my faith. I walked through that camp with other men, saw what humans had done to other humans, and I understood something. If God existed, if he was all-powerful and all-loving like I'd been taught, then he'd allowed this. He'd watched this happen and done nothing, which meant either God wasn't powerful, or he wasn't loving, or he didn't exist. Any of those options meant everything I'd believed was a lie. But I still had a job to do. The prisoners who survived needed chaplains, needed someone to say prayers, perform burials, offer comfort. Jewish chaplains were working with the Jewish survivors. I worked with the Christian ones, the political prisoners, the others. They'd ask me where God was, why he'd allowed this, how they were supposed to have faith after what they'd endured. I had no answers. I'd stopped having answers months ago. But I sat with them anyway, prayed with them, listened to their stories. Because even without faith, there's value in bearing witness, in acknowledging suffering, in being present with people in their pain. Maybe that's all chaplaincy ever was. Not delivering God's word, but just being there. Being someone who acknowledges that what happened was real, was terrible, was significant. The war in Europe ended in May, VE Day. Everyone celebrating, drinking, cheering. We'd won, defeated fascism, saved the world. I stood there watching the celebrations and felt nothing. No joy, no relief, no sense of victory. Just exhaustion and emptiness and the weight of all the dead I'd prayed over. How many funerals had I performed? Hundreds, 1,000. I'd stopped counting. Each one a life cut short, a family destroyed, a future erased. And for what? So we could draw new lines on maps, so politicians could declare victory. The other chaplains were planning a big service, giving thanks to God for victory, for protecting our troops, for delivering us from evil. They asked me to help lead it. I declined, told them I wasn't feeling well. The truth was, I couldn't stand up there and thank God for anything, not after what I'd seen. I came home in September 1945, discharged with honors, commendations from commanders, gratitude from the men I'd served with. They gave me a Bronze Star for valor under fire. I threw it in a drawer and never looked at it again. The church I'd served before the war welcomed me back, wanted me to resume my position as pastor. The congregation was eager to hear about my experiences, wanted me to preach about faith in wartime, about God's protection, about divine providence. I tried, God help me, I tried. First Sunday back, I stood in that pulpit looking at those faces. Good people, kind people. People who believed God was good and the world made sense. And I couldn't do it. Couldn't preach the sermons they wanted to hear. I told them the truth instead. Told them about Tommy Brennan dying in the snow, worried about being damned for minor sins while the world burned around him. Told them about holding men down while surgeons sawed off their legs without anesthesia. Told them about Dachau, about what humans do to each other when they decide other humans aren't really human. Told them I didn't know where God was in any of it, that I'd stopped believing he was there at all. The congregation was silent, shocked. The elders asked me to take some time off, to rest, to recover from combat fatigue, suggested I talk to a doctor, get some help. But I wasn't sick. I was just honest. And honesty had no place in a church that wanted comfortable lies about God's plan and divine mercy. I resigned 2 weeks later. Couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't stand in front of people and promise them that God loved them, that he had a plan, that everything happened for a reason. Because if everything happened for a reason, then God's reason included industrial genocide and boys drowning in their own blood and suffering beyond comprehension. And I couldn't worship a God like that. My wife left me 6 months later. She'd tried to be patient, tried to understand. But I was different, cold, distant, couldn't connect to anything or anyone, couldn't feel anything except this vast emptiness where my faith used to be. I don't know you anymore, she said when she left. The man I married believed in something. You don't believe in anything. She was right. The war had taken everything. My faith, my purpose, my ability to love or hope or trust. I was a shell of a person, going through the motions of living without any idea why. I got a job as a clerk in a department store, anonymous work, no decisions, no responsibility, no one depending on me for spiritual guidance I couldn't provide. At night, I'd dream about the boys I'd prayed over, see their faces, hear their last words, feel their hands gripping mine as they died. And I'd wake up knowing I'd lied to all of them. 7 years now since the war ended. 7 years of living with the weight of what I saw, what I did, what I failed to do. People ask me sometimes if I regret leaving the ministry, if I miss it, if I ever think about going back. The answer is complicated. I miss the person I was before the war. The man who believed God was good and the universe was just and suffering had meaning. That man could stand in a pulpit and offer genuine comfort, real hope. That man believed what he preached. But that man is dead, died somewhere between Normandy and Germany, buried under thousands of prayers I didn't believe, killed by the gap between what faith promised and what reality delivered. What's left is someone who knows too much, who's seen too clearly what humans are capable of, who can't unknow what he knows about the nature of suffering and the absence of divine intervention. But here's the strange thing. I think maybe I was a better chaplain after I lost my faith than before. When I still believed, I'd offer easy answers. Tell men that God had a plan, that their suffering served a purpose, that the dead were in a better place. I'd give them theological comfort that didn't actually address their pain. After I stopped believing, I had nothing to offer but presence. I couldn't promise meaning or purpose, couldn't guarantee salvation or divine mercy. All I could do was sit with dying boys and acknowledge their fear and pain, bear witness to their suffering without trying to explain it away, and maybe that was more honest, more valuable. Maybe being present with someone in their pain, without trying to fix it or justify it or find meaning in it, is more meaningful than all the prayers and promises in the world. I think about Tommy Brennan a lot. That Irish kid who died worried about being damned. I lied to him, told him he was forgiven, that he was going to heaven. Had no authority to make those promises, no faith to back them up. But it gave him peace. In his last moments, he was calm, not afraid, ready to let go. Was that lie worth it? I don't know. but I'd do it again. Would lie to 1,000 dying boys if it gave them even a moment of peace before the end. Maybe that's what faith is really for. Not truth, but comfort. Not answers, but presence. Not explaining suffering, but just acknowledging it and sitting with people while they endure it. I'm not a chaplain anymore. Not a minister. Not even particularly religious. I go to church sometimes, sit in the back, listen to the sermons. Don't believe most of what I hear. But I appreciate what the church does, giving people community, comfort, something to hold on to. Even if it's built on lies, maybe that's okay. Maybe humans need lies to survive, need to believe in meaning and purpose and divine plans, because the alternative, that we're alone in an indifferent universe where suffering is random and meaningless, is too terrible to face. The war taught me that faith isn't about truth. It's about survival. It's about finding ways to keep going when everything is horrible and nothing makes sense. I survived the war, survived losing my faith, survived becoming someone I don't recognize. And I keep going day by day, even though I don't know why or what for. Maybe that's its own kind of faith. Not faith in God, but faith that life is worth living even when you can't see the point, even when you've lost everything you believed in. I stopped believing in God somewhere between Normandy and the Bulge, but I never stopped praying, because the boys needed someone to pray over them. And maybe that's all that ever mattered.